Awesome. Okay, recording. Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to the second boot camp. So this is, we kind of mentioned this as like tech stack, but after like refining the PowerPoint more, we realized there's a lot more to the tech stack that product managers should know. And so this presentation will kind of be about the main concepts of both the dev side and the design side, and then kind of seeing how the PM role combines those two responsibilities and presents it in like a cohesive manner for the nonprofit clients. So, okay, so these are the four, or I guess five, main topics we'll be covering today. So Web Dev 101, which will talk about the MERN stack, as well as what APIs are and kind of the difference between server versus client. I also touch a little bit about Git and kind of what that is. Maybe you guys might be familiar already. And then also the fidelities of design prototypes, and then how all of those features combine into the information architecture. And then at the very end, we will also go in depth of kind of how to determine what's feasible for our clients. So yeah.
This video is being recorded, is that on your screen or is that just on this side?
Oh, yeah, I knew in my head. Sorry. Okay.
Cool. So starting off with the web basics. So a web page is made with HTML, which is hypertext markup language, and then CSS, which is this cascading style sheet. So pretty much it's used to define everything that's on the web page and then to style it to make it look good, so it's not just plain text. So for example, if you've ever taken a coding class, you know, the first thing you do is hello world. So pretty much if you want to print hello world to a screen, you say, put the P quotes, that's a paragraph, you type hello world, and then it shows up on the page. But obviously that's not that pretty. So let's say you want to change the color to blue, you would add CSS. This is some gibberish, and then you add color equals blue and the text will show up blue. So pretty much looking at this web page where it says web basics that like defines a text box, the styling will say add a border around it, center it, and make it like this size. And that's pretty much like the basics of web dev. Oh, sorry. Yes, but then you need a little bit more. So let's say you want to change to what the text says. Anything that makes a website reactive, so it allows it to change, allows user to enter input, that uses JavaScript. So that allows you to add new elements, adds button clicks, fetches user data. So if you like log in, it calls the request and reloads that onto the screen. And so much more that's done with JavaScript, which is kind of connecting the front end and making it more adaptive. And finally, there's React. So Facebook decided back in 2013 that you can do even more with web development. So they kind of made it components. So let's say I have the slide deck and I want to make 20 different slides. The slide wouldn't be a component itself. You would decide like the background of it, you would decide all the elements, and then the only difference would be like the title and the content. So that's kind of what React brings. You can create components, you can add them. So next page. So this is kind of like, you know, the first one you just had the paragraph. This is kind of a snippet of JavaScript. So you would say, let's say you want to have an application and you put a class name, and that class name kind of links to the CSS. So for it, you would say like class name app, and you would say, oh, I want the text to be black, I want it to be bold and stuff like that. And there you would define the elements. So let's say you have the navigation bar and you can look back and see the nav bar there, and you would say, I want the links to the homepage, the login and sign up. So that way you can have a bunch of different files with a bunch of different components, and instead of having one huge page with a lot of text, you can break it up. And then here you say like, oh, and this is the homepage. You would have a separate page where you say homepage has like a photo of me and a little description. And that's kind of how you piece everything together. Yeah. And this is a bit more information. You can also write methods. So let's say you have a user and you define all the parameters for the user. And once you want to display the element, here H1 is like the bold text, and you would say hello. And then you would format all the code for the users. So instead of kind of like typing it in, you can call methods to make it easier for users to read. So I guess like going through that, that's what developers will be doing. So if they mention any of that stuff, now you kind of know their language. And going through Node is, now you're written all your code, you have it all fancy. How do you make sure it works? So Node is the like JavaScript runtime. So you kind of say, run this program, and then it creates a copy of your web application on your device. So no one else can see it but you, but you're able to go and see how all the code looks on your screen. And also Node, there's an NPM, the Node Package Manager. So let's say you want to add a calendar to your website. there's other people out there who have spent countless hours making calendars. So you don't have to put all the boxes together, all that stuff. You just say like install calendar and call show calendar and it shows up on your page. So that's kind of the power of Node and NPM. You can use all the code anyone's ever written and just import it in your application. So you just need to know kind of like how to use everything else and piece it together, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Does anyone know what an HTTP request is? Okay, you want to talk about it? Yeah, no? Okay, next slide. You'll find out.
Oh.
Cool.
Oh, that's it. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So HTTP is like the hypertext transfer protocol, which sounds very fancy, but pretty much it's how the internet communicates. So when you enter a website, http.amazon.com, it kind of like links that to the Amazon web page, makes a call to Amazon and says, please send me back all the information you need. And it kind of communicates between the clients and the servers. So the first part of it is the clients or the front end of it. And that's everything the user sees. So that runs on your machine. Everyone's front end is different. So if I go to Amazon.com and go on my account, that's different than your Amazon.com. And that's where all the buttons are, where all the forms, everything you click and interact, that's front end. But what happens when you actually click the button? So that's more back end. So it connects to all the data, it connects to all, that's living somewhere else. So all the data is stored somewhere remotely. You click the button and it says, oh, fetch. Like if you click on like something you want to buy a Christmas present and you click on like the cat blanket you want, all the information, the prices, the information sender, that's somewhere else. And when you click it, that makes an HTTP request and fetches all the information. Databases. Yeah, does anyone know what a database is?
Where all the information is like stored.
Yeah, wonderful. Yes, ish.
Perfect. Yo.
Oh,
okay.
yeah. So database is kind of like structuring your data. So it makes it easy. You say, I want a person and I want the person to have a name, a phone number, their date of birth, and all that stuff. So that way, every time you add something to the database, it needs all those fields and it's easy when you fetch it, it has everything you want. And it's very common in web applications and lots of companies made huge data servers and that just sits somewhere and that's where all the world's data is. And there's pretty much 4 crude or main operations. That's creating, reading, updating, and deleting. And I'll go more into that shortly. So creating, that's pretty much creating a new and adding a document to a collection. So let's say I have a database of people and I want to add myself to it. I put my name, my age, and my description. I could link because that's all I do with all my classes. And yeah, that's the first step of crude. And then next one's read. So that's retrieving. So let's say I made my profile, I sign in, and I want to display my name and information on the website. It makes the read request and the database sends back all the information about you. And then updating, pretty much this is what you would supply. Let's say where name equals Emily, update it so that the description says outdoor survivalist, because out in nature this weekend, having a good time. And that is one of the modifications. And finally, the last one's deleting. Let's say I no longer am part of Cal Poly, I graduate. They don't want me in their user database. They say wherever name equals Emily. Obviously, they want more information like last name. That would delete it, and then they'll no longer be there. So, yes. No. So Mongo is the database that the developers will be using, and it's document oriented. So that's kind of a way of saying you create a document, which is one entry. It has all the fields about a user. So like the name, the first name, last name, here are all the projects I'm working on. And you just have a list of them. And afterwards you'd say like where ID equals this, that'd be a unique identifier, return all the information. And yeah, when you hear Mongo mentioned, that's the database they're using.
All right. So next big kind of piece of code that a lot of people use are APIs. And APIs stand for Application Programming Interface. And they're kind of a safe place for front end and back end to pass data. Or in our case, it's a way for our client to be able to retrieve data from an external third-party application and display it on their end. They also use REST APIs, which is very similar to the CRUD operations that Emily just mentioned. And all you really need to know is that they just let 2 applications talk to each other. There's one application that we make, which is, the web app. And then the other application is something that's already made or that has data that we would like to retrieve. And examples of that may include Google. So what's really popular are web APIs. And some examples of that are like when you log into a website and you have the ability to log in with your Facebook or Google profile. That ability is done through APIs that connects your app to the Facebook and Google database, and then connects it to, and that that allows for like two-step authentication and easier login accessibility, so on and so forth. Other really popular examples of APIs are like directly accessing Google Maps from another app. Sometimes when they like have like the location, it just immediately has Google Maps integrated within the web app. And also just checking the weather, having the weather track on, or like the current weather displayed on your app. It's like we aren't personally gathering all the weather data. We're retrieving the data from another weather source, and that is through APIs. So this is, pretty helpful for developers because, it helps with a lot of kind of features, like as mentioned before, two-step authentications, or like, I don't know, what else?
Yeah, also like PayPal, like you don't
Oh,
want
yeah,
to manage your
PayPal.
money. If you say, I will call someone, like you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Companies spend millions of dollars perfecting stuff and you just
Exactly.
call their methods and it all works flawlessly. Or it
Yep.
should.
Yep. So big fan of APIs.
Cool. So Express is kind of a way we can call all these methods. So it starts with HTTP requests, which is hypertext transfer protocol, and it's kind of the way we send things across the web. Kind of mentioned it earlier. So like when you type in a website name, it sends that, but also you can send parameters. So let's say I want to log into testing.com, and pretty much when you click login, you type your username password, it will send like a really similar request to that where it will say your username password, and it will send it to the backend server that's waiting for the request. So Express is kind of the service that the developers are using to communicate between front end and backend. And it also has like the CRUD operations where you post a request, which is when you want to add something to the database or from the server. A read is or a get request is when you want to fetch something from the server. Update put is when you want to change something, and finally delete is if you want to remove something. And this is kind of saying like, oh, when you put a backslash, so that means the main site return hello world or something like that. And then if you would say /login, then you'll say like, oh, you'll want to have a put request because you're passing in parameters, and that will log you in. Stuff like that. Finally, putting everything together, it forms the MERN stack. So that's what the developers are learning during this 4-week bootcamp. You just learned in the past 20 minutes, so congratulations. So Mongo is the database that's using. So that's where like a separate third party is like mongodb.com. That's where all the data is stored and fetched, and that's like the way it's structured. Then Express is communicating between front end and back end. So one place you have all the fancy UI where people can click, have all the buttons, and then where it connects to the data that uses Express. React is creating the user interface itself. And then finally we have Node, which is running the code, installing all the third-party packages that we don't make ourselves. And yeah, you combine the MERN stack, these are all the nice photos, and it creates a nice complete working website. Wait, before we move on, do you have any questions?
Sorry, it was a lot of information.
A lot of questions, but yeah. You're all web dev experts, perfect.
Awesome. Just curious, does anyone already have experience with using Git or GitHub?
Yeah, it's for like version control, right?
Yeah.
It's like update it, and then if you like break something, you go back.
Yeah, exactly. Have you used it before in the Python class? Okay, that's totally fine. Again, we as product managers will not be like interacting with it, but it's nice to know of like the platform that the developers are using, so you aren't too lost when if they ever like try to explain some things that they're working on. But so Git, it is a distributed version control tool made in 2005 by Linus Torvalds. I don't know if I said that properly. But it is basically a system that, as I said before, it's like it keeps tracks of changes and versions of files set over time. And in doing so, you can always refer to past versions, and like you can push new versions and also pull in recent versions, so on and so forth. And it's just like a constant chain of histories of code that you can like look back and edit. So there's like some terms they use. It was just like committing, push, pull. Pushing code is like you push. I don't know.
I can go into it a
Oh
little
yeah,
bit
you don't
too,
know.
Yeah, so push, you're writing code. Obviously, not all of it's good. If you think it's at a state that you want to save it, pushing pretty much saves the working copy. So only when you push can you go back to it, but if you don't push, like like your progress won't be tracked.
Mhm.
And then pulling is if you keep working, you're on stage 5 and you want to go back to stage 3, like you can move it. And also if I'm working with Maggie, I'm on stage 5, she works on stage 6. I like go to work on it next. I can pull all her changes and get everything she's worked on onto my machine. And there's no need to like send files, send any folders or anything. Like Git handles all of that for you.
Thank
Makes
you.
sense. Anything
Yes.
else?
So yeah, that's the main commands of Git, I guess. There's a lot of features within it, but you don't need to know all of it. So repositories are the collection of all your files and changes over time. That's kind of like the big hub of where all the files are. And in this case, is where all the files and code of where the web app will be. We just push the code into one big repository. So everyone in the team isn't pulling from like their own individual kind of code source because a lot of that could be outdated really fast because everyone's, contributing code and also receiving code updates. So it's really helpful to just have one main repository that has like the constant updated version that developers pull from. So Git is the version control system tool, and GitHub is basically the largest Git platform or hosting service that people use today. There's like billions of repositories in there. Don't quote me on that. But GitHub is really popular because it really helps in making collaborating on code a lot more streamlined. It has functionalities like issues, so people can really list out what specific issues people need to work on or make code for. And there's also pull requests when someone wants to kind of push the new code that they made, but they don't want to like ruin or potentially break the existing code. Doing pull requests are nice because it kind of lets people do like a double check, make sure everything looks good and cohesive before officially merging it into the main repository. That's not
Yeah.
good, right?
And then in terms of Git, you probably might need to use it. All the developers will make the code, and in order for you to see all their changes, you'll kind of just use the latest changes on the master repository, get all of it, and then that will let you see everything that they've done so far on your machine. So
Yeah.
pretty much you'll need Git to say pull all the local changes and then run the code.
Yes.
So yes.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, it would, yeah. You probably need the most recent code, especially to do demos for the nonprofits, which will come up like during the midway point and then the final demonstration, if it's not been already deployed to a URL. But yeah, so this is kind of a screenshot of what GitHub looks like. This is just like kind of what the repository looks like with all the files. And then this agent, they kind of look a lot bigger than this sometimes, but and has like a description below, depending on if they have like details about the project to add. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And then there is a feature in GitHub called Github Projects, and it's a really neat way to kind of organize issues. Some developers may use it for their app, some may not. It's really dependent on what they agree on, but this is like kind of the Kanban board
Yeah, this is
template
kind
that
of
they
like
use.
all the tasks people are currently working on. So GitHub lets you manage all of that.
Yeah, and then you like through this, you can also add tags of like, oh, what is a bug? What is a new feature being added? You can like kind of sort them and what's in progress right now or what features, what code issues have been completed. and so on and so forth. So this is like a really good outlook on like how to track the progress of the web app and how to like, and to visualize what actual code files are relating towards specific like real world issues that are being described for the app. Okay, so that's kind of it for the tech side. Again, do you have like any questions or things you want to clarify? All right, well, if you do, we'll stick around and afterwards a little more. But now we go like a little bit into design. There's just one main aspect of it that you need to know, but there's this term called fidelities, and some people may not know what that means. And it's what is like the fidelity kind of describes prototypes or wireframes, and it refers to how the level of detail and realism, that doesn't, refers to the level of detail and realism towards the final products. And knowing the fidelity of the prototype you are showing to the client is pretty important because you need to understand kind of the limitations of the prototype. For example, if the client like is like trying to like click on something and it's like not working, they're like, what the heck? And then it'll just kind of like complicate the overall process and experience. So being able to understand the limitations of the current prototype helps not only the nonprofit, but it also helps you visualize kind of the core needs that are shown within that fidelity of the client for kind of the overall web app experience. And these are like kind of the three examples of the different fidelities. There's low fidelity and then mid and high fidelity. And it's pretty like self-explanatory, but low is just like the very bare bones of the idea. It's kind of just realizing the main functions of the web app, the main necessities, and how it just like kind of looks, but it's not like interactive. It's basically like a sketch of like different screenshots. Mid fidelity is when functionality or interactions start actually being implemented. So that's when, oh, like the user can like actually click on a button and then it should go to the home page, or they can like, you know, like select a drop down button and so on and so forth. And that's when like kind of the design and the overall layout is a little more refined. So the client has a better idea of what the user journey will look like. And then the last is the high fidelity, which is basically what the end product will hopefully look like. It's just very refined. Some prototypes online, honestly, like it feels just like a real app just because of how like interactive it is. And they can go like really in depth and cool. So I don't know. I just think prototypes are cool, but you personally will not be making prototypes, but it's, again, it's nice to know like what to expect from them and like how to interact with them and how to explain the limitations for the client. So yeah, so that's it for design. And so now you have kind of background on the dev side and background on the design. And how does the PM role connect these two? Well, it's not only like combining all of those concepts in like a explainable format, but it also really helps in establishing the information architecture. And what that is kind of a design structure that organizes which features are going where. And again, it kind of combines the content of the code structure and the user journeys of like the real world, real life interactions. So this is like kind of an example of what an information architecture looks like, but it kind of visualizes the user path within the web app, and it can also help determine where the application data is being retrieved or displayed. So for in this example, I'm not sure if you can see, but the first level is the show website homepage. And then from the homepage, you can choose between women's shoes or men's shoes. Let's say they choose women's shoes. Okay, then you know that you can retrieve the data for women's shoes to display either high heel shoes or flat shoes. and then so on and so forth. And then after high heels, you show like the specific products, which is where, ideally you'd get the data retrieved for the individual information. And then, so this really helps in establishing kind of, okay, you get all this code, but how does that play in like what the user sees? This is just like, it really helps keep it in a readable format. And having a solid understanding of the information architecture also really helps with the prototypes and establishing how the user interacts with the web app and the data that it holds. This really cements the user journey, and again, just like the architecture of how things are stored. So yeah, that's really helpful. And knowing after you talk with your nonprofit, it's really important to get a good idea for the information architecture, because it really helps a lot in establishing kind of not only the features that are needed for each level, but also kind of the, again, the user journey and what is expected of their experience with our app. So feasibility, we got all that. And when you're talking with the nonprofit, there's like all of these code stuff, these React libraries, the APIs. Sometimes it's like, you don't really know what we can offer versus what is like out of our scope for a club. Because we are a student-run club. We are all doing this in our free time. So there are like limitations. In terms of the club itself, we focus on web apps only. So at the moment, at least, which means that we really focus on making websites. So what that means is that we can't offer like apps. We can't really make apps for them. We haven't gone that direction yet. But what we have done in the past for nonprofits that require kind of mobile functionality is that we can make it mobile friendly. So if they would still have to access it on like a web kind of server, but it could like, we can still make it very like readable from your device. So there's that. Also, we cannot be HIPAA compliant. What does that mean? I did not know at first, but it basically means that you can't really store personally identifiable info or like sensitive info, for example, social security number or medical issues. Yeah, that brings in like legality issues. So we don't really interact with that. But for the most part, we have like discussed with the nonprofits. They all like understand this, so it should not be an issue, but it's always nice to just establish that. And we kind of touched on this before with like the NPM and the API stuff, and there's also like React libraries. There's already so much code in the world that other people have already spent thousands of hours on, and I've already like really honed it down, made it as like efficient as possible, and it's all like there for us to access. So using React actually makes a lot of features possible. Use them a lot for like calendars and what's it called? What else? Login or like authentication. We've done that a lot. Trying to go off my head. I don't know.
Yeah, so you'll be meeting with the nonprofit sometime mid to late November. And then they'll be like, oh, we want to make X so-and-so, we want to make a new Amazon. Be like, sorry, we can't do that. But we can make a login page for you and display a calendar for all your goals. So kind of, we'll be going through more like what we've done for past projects, and that should give you like a pretty good feasibility of what we can do in like the 2-quarter time frame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then of course, like you looking at past examples is really helpful, because a lot of nonprofits are asking for, the same kind of needs, but sometimes some of them require like new features, and then there might be times where you aren't sure whether or not it's achievable. So if that ever happens during a call, the first, you just need to be honest with the nonprofit. Just be like, hey, like I can't confirm whether like I can't give you a definite answer at this moment, but I'll definitely get back to you within the next 24 hours on that, possibility. And they'll be like, okay, cool. Yeah, that's it. Just like really just be honest with them. I don't want to like kind of lead them on, I'd say, but it's just like, yeah, establishing trust is really important, and being honest with them helps in both parties. So
And I think also really important to figure out what is their must have and what's their want. So if like I think making clear that this is what they need to be able to use the website to get value out of it. These are the nice to have features that if we have extra time at the end, we'll add. I think that's like a really important part of meeting the interviewee.
yeah.
a nonprofit.
Yeah, time is definitely a big factor in feasibility as well, because of course we want to get the main features done and then consider all the nice to have features. But yeah, that's for another session. And then also after you communicate with them, you just ask us, or yeah, ask us. I ask Ethan and the other engineers all the time whether or not something's feasible. So there's definitely no shame in just like asking for confirmation and like, getting another perspective on it. But yeah, I think that's it. Oh yeah, so that was a lot. A lot of the information is actually from previous dev and design boot camps, which again, I will link in our PM Notion. But that's pretty much it. So thank you so much for sitting through all of that. That was a lot. Again, do you guys have any questions about anything that was presented?
Yeah, when we're interviewing the nonprofits, can we bring a dev with us or like a tech lead so they can help with that like feasibility ratings? So instead of like having a bunch of like what ifs, what can we deliver? Just like just a whole host of what ifs. Like we can give them clear, definite answers as soon as possible and kind of find a trajectory of where to go.
So you'll actually won't be assigned a tech lead or a dev to your team until like December to January. So I think the first meeting will just be you, but then you can definitely reach out to us as soon as like it's done and maybe have like a second follow-up interview. You'll also be having, like we're trying to have all the nonprofits come to one of the next general meeting and present their nonprofit. So you can kind of have like a brief overview of the project. So you can ask us like before going into the interview any questions you may have. And we'll also go more in depth about this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? Cool.
Okay. Oh, that was it. Thank you so much. I'm gonna end this recording. Yeah.